Welcome to Nicki Cozy Stories. I'm your host, Nicki. Tonight's story is called Rumpelstiltskin, an old fairy tale from a time when spinning wheels hummed beside candlelight late into the night. So settle in and let the story begin. In the old days, long before cloth came easily from distant mills, thread was born slowly, one patient strand at a time. In cottages and farmhouses, in lofts above bakeries, in narrow chambers tucked beneath old beams, spinning wheels turned through the evening hours with their soft, steady hum. Baskets of flax stood near the hearth. Skeins of wool waited in the half-light. Women worked by candle flame until their eyes grew tired, and they still worked, for linen and wool did not make themselves, and winter was always waiting somewhere beyond the fields. It was quiet work, and often lonely. Because of that, people said curious things about spinning rooms. They said that when a wheel turned late into the night, and the house had gone still, the unseen world sometimes drifted closer. A room lit by one candle and the glow of a low fire seemed to belong not only to the one who sat there, but to older things as well, to whispers, to bargains, to watchers just beyond the circle of light. Whether such things were true, no one could say for certain. But it is true that, on a winter evening long ago, in a small mill house near the edge of the dark wood, a miller's daughter sat beside a spinning wheel while the wind moved around the walls like a restless hand. The room was modest, though well kept. A low fire burned in the hearth. A candle stood on the rough wooden table, its flame leaning each time a draught found its way through the old stone. There were baskets near her feet, one with wool, one with mending, and one nearly empty but for a few pale tufts left behind from the day's work. Against one wall stood sacks of grain waiting for the morning, and above her the timbers gave their occasional creak, familiar as breath. The girl spun quietly. She was not idle, and she was not dreamy in a careless way that some village girls were said to be. Her thoughts moved gently, but they moved with purpose, and her hands knew her work well. She drew the fibers out with even care, guiding them into the thread while the wheel answered its low, murmuring song. It was a sort of sound one stopped hearing after a while, until it seemed to join the fire, the wind, and the turning of dark itself. Now and then she lifted her eyes to the window. The panes were dim with frost at the corners. Beyond them lay only the black shape of winter fields, and farther still, the tree line of the forest. The moon was hidden behind the clouds. Somewhere outside, the mill wheel groaned once in the cold, and fell silent again. It had grown late. Her father had not yet returned from town. That, more than the hour, had begun to trouble her. He was not a cruel man, nor even a hard one, but he was a man too eager for notice, too pleased when others listened, and too ready to speak grandly when modest truth would have served him better. He had seen it before at market, at feast days, in the company of men who carried themselves as if importance might be caught like a fever. It always left a faint unease behind, like smoke in a room after the fire had gone out. She set aside the spindle for a moment and fed another small piece of wood to the fire. The flame brightened, painting the walls in gold and shadow. Her own shadow rose behind her, long and wavering, then settled again. For a little while she listened, not to the wheel now, but to the hush between sounds. Then, at last, she heard footsteps. Not one pair, several. Her hand stilled. A moment later the door opened and her father entered with snow caught along the hem of his coat and a strained, unnatural brightness in his face. Behind him, filling the doorway with cold air and torchlight, stood 2 of the king's men. For one suspended moment, no one spoke. The girl rose slowly from her stool. She looked first at the soldiers, then at her father. He could not meet her eyes for long. He removed his cap, turned it once in his hands, and gave the sort of smile people wear when they've already done something they cannot undo. "My daughter," he said too quickly, "you must come with us to the castle." The room seemed to grow smaller around her. She did not ask why at once, because some part of her already knew that whatever had been said in town had now traveled farther than the words should have ever gone. She saw it in her father's face, in his shame, in his foolish pride, in the fear already beginning to rise beneath both. "What have you told them?" she asked, and her voice was quiet enough that the fire's soft crackling nearly swallowed it. Her father swallowed too. Then, with the king's men standing silent in the open door, winter wind curling at their boots, he answered. "I told the king," he said, "that you can spin straw into gold." The candle gave a small, unsteady flicker. And in that instant, with the wind at the threshold and the torchlight burning against the snow beyond, the girl understood that her life, which had been ordinary a moment before, had just been carried into the hands of people far more dangerous than hunger or winter. She reached for her cloak. Without another word, she went. The road to the castle was hard with frost, and the sound of the horses' hooves rose sharply in the winter dark. Elsa rode in silence between the king's men, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, though the cold still found its way through the wool. Behind her, the familiar shape of the mill house had already faded into the night. The fields lay pale beneath a thin wash of moonlight, and beyond them, the forest stood like a dark border at the edge of the world, motionless and deep. She didn't turn to look back again. There was nothing in that small house that could help her now. Her father had spoken very little after they set out. Once or twice she heard him clear his throat, as though he meant to say something. Some hurried reassurance, perhaps, but no words came. Elsa didn't ask for any. The lie he had told had already passed beyond apology. It now belonged to a king. As they rode, she tried to think plainly, the way she always did when worry threatened to scatter her thoughts. Perhaps the king meant only to question her. Perhaps he would see the foolishness of the claim once he heard her speak. Perhaps the whole matter would dissolve in embarrassment and she would return home before morning. But as the castle rose before them, bright with torchlight against the winter sky, that hope began to fade. The castle was grand indeed. It stood above the town on a height of stone, its outer walls silvered with frost, its many windows glowing warm gold in the darkness. Torches burned beside the gates. High roofs climbed one above another, and narrow towers stood at the corners like silent watchers. It was beautiful in the way some things are beautiful, only from a distance. Inside, it was warmer, but not kinder. The great hall they entered stretched high above their heads. Firelight moved across tall pillars of stone. Heavy tapestries hung along the walls, woven with hunts and battles and crowned figures whose still faces seemed to observe everything that passed below them. Servants moved quietly along the edges of the room. Guards stood beside the doors, unmoving as statues. Every sound echoed. Even the air felt different here, thick with smoke and wax and polished wood, with none of the floor dust or wool or simple warmth of home. Elsa felt, more keenly than ever, how small a single life could seem beneath such a roof. The king did not keep them waiting long. He entered through a side archway with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He wore dark velvet lined with fur, and rings glimmered faintly when he lifted his hand. His face was not unkind at first glance, yet There was a sharp brightness in his eyes that made Elsa think of someone who liked the sound of promises, especially promises that might lead to wealth. "So," the king said, looking at her with open curiosity, "this is the daughter." Her father bowed quickly. "Yes, your majesty. This is my daughter Elsa." The king studied her for a moment. "I am told," he said, "that you possess a remarkable skill." Elsa lifted her gaze carefully. "Your majesty, I spin wool and flax, as many women do." "But straw into gold?" he asked lightly. Elsa hesitated only a moment. "No one can do such a thing." Behind her, she felt her father stiffen. The king's expression changed very little. If anything, he seemed faintly amused. "Your father spoke with great confidence." "My father spoke unwisely," Elsa said quietly. A few of the nearby servants lowered their eyes. No one else spoke. For a moment, Elsa wondered if perhaps the king would laugh and dismiss this matter entirely. But the small smile that appeared on his face held something else in it, something thoughtful and calculating. "There is an easy way to learn the truth of such claims." He turned and gestured toward the staircase. Elsa followed because there was nothing else to do. They climbed upward through the quieter parts of the castle, where the torches burned lower and fewer servants passed. The tapestries disappeared. The corridors narrowed. The air grew still and faintly cold again. At the end of a long passage stood a heavy door, banded with iron. The king himself opened it. The chamber beyond was lit by several candles, and the last dim of a glowing fire in the hearth. At first Elsa saw only high stone walls and narrow windows set deep within them. Then she saw the straw. It filled the room in pale heaps, stacked along the walls and spilling across the floor in dry, rustling drifts. In some places, it rose nearly to her shoulders. Beside it stood a spinning wheel and a distaff, placed neatly near the low stool, as though someone had carefully prepared the scene for work that they had not yet begun. The smell of dry straw filled the air. The king stepped aside. "Well then," he said almost pleasantly, "here is your opportunity." Elsa looked at the straw, and then at the silent spinning wheel. She knew that wheel well. It was the same sort used in every village across the countryside. It could turn wool into thread, flax into linen, but nothing more. She turned slowly back to the king. "No one can spin straw into gold." The king regarded her calmly. "By morning," he replied, "this straw must be spun into gold." The words were spoken as evenly as if he had been discussing the weather. Elsa felt a coldness pass through her. "And if it is not?" The king watched her for a moment in the candlelight. "Then I will know," he said quietly, "that I have been deceived." He did not say what would follow. He didn't need to. Behind her, her father shifted uneasily. Elsa turned slightly, hoping perhaps against reason, that he might finally speak the truth aloud and put an end to the lie that he had begun. But he said nothing, and the king nodded to the guards. Elsa was guided into the chamber. The heavy door closed behind her. A moment later she heard the key turn in the lock. For a while she stood very still. The candle flames wavered softly in their holders. The straw rustled faintly whenever the air stirred. The spinning wheel waited in silence beside the stool. Beyond the narrow window, the winter wind moved across the high walls of the castle. Slowly, Elsa crossed the room and sat beside the wheel. She touched it lightly. The wood was smooth from years of use, though never for work like this. Straw could be twisted, broken, burned, but spun into gold? The thought was impossible. At last the fear that she had held back during the long ride rose within her. She lowered her head and wept quietly. The chamber remained silent except for the soft crackle of dying fire. After a time, Elsa lifted her eyes again. Something in the room had changed. The candle beside the door flickered, though no wind had touched it. The shadows along the wall seemed deeper than before. And then a small voice spoke from the darkness. "Good evening," it said softly. "What troubles you so?" Elsa, startled, turned toward the voice. For a moment, she thought the shadows themselves had spoken. The chamber was still lit, only by the wavering candles and the dull red glow of the hearth. The straw lay pale and quiet in its heaps. The spinning wheel waited exactly where it had before. And yet someone else was in the room. Near the far side of the chamber, where the candlelight thinned and the shadows gathered more thickly along the wall, stood a small figure she had not yet seen before. He was no taller than a child, though he didn't move like one. His shoulders were narrow, and he wore a curious coat of dark green cloth that seemed almost too fine for so strange a visitor. His shoes were pointed. His hair, what little of it showed beneath a small cap, shone pale in the dim light like frost caught on grass. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were bright and knowing, as if the world had already shown him many things, and none of them had surprised him for very long. Elsa rose slowly from the spinning wheel. "How did you come in here?" she asked. The little man tilted his head slightly, as though the question amused him. "Oh," he said, glancing briefly toward the locked door. "Doors and walls trouble some people more than they trouble others." His voice was quiet and pleasant, almost conversational, yet something about it made Elsa uneasy. It was the voice of someone who had been listening long before he had spoken. "You were crying," he continued gently, "and this room smells strongly of fear. That is often how I find my way to places like this." Elsa felt the truth of that statement settle over the chamber like a second shadow. "Who are you?" she asked. The little man gave a small shrug. "Names are curious things," he said. "Sometimes it's better not to offer them too quickly." He stepped forward then, lightly as though the straw beneath his feet weighed nothing at all. The candlelight caught him more clearly now. His coat was finely stitched, though very old in its style, and the silver buttons along the front gleamed faintly. He glanced around the room. "A great deal of straw," he observed. Elsa folded her arms tightly. "The king believes I can spin it into gold," she said. "And if it's not done by morning—" She didn't finish the sentence. The little man nodded slowly, as though he already understood the ending that she had left unspoken. "Aye," he said, "a promise made by someone else. Those are often the most troublesome kind." Elsa looked at him sharply. "You know about promises?" "My dear," the little man replied softly, "promises are the oldest work of the world." He walked toward the spinning wheel and touched it lightly, setting it, turning it just a little. The wood hummed faintly before settling again. Then he turned back to her. "What would you give," he asked, "if someone could spin the straw into gold for you?" The question hung in the air. Elsa felt the weight of it at once. Nothing in his tone suggested kindness, yet neither did he sound cruel. It was simply a question asked by someone who understood the value of things. She hesitated. "You cannot do such a thing," she said. The little man smiled faintly. "You would be surprised at what can be done when the night is long and the bargain is fair." He glanced again at the tall heaps of straw. "It would be unfortunate," he added thoughtfully, "if all this remained straw by morning." Elsa's gaze drifted toward the locked door. The king's words returned to her. "Then I will know I have been deceived." She knew well enough what kings did to those who deceived them. Slowly, she lifted her hand to the chain around her neck. It was a simple thing, a small gold necklace her mother had once worn before the illness had taken her years ago. Elsa had kept it always, not for its worth, but for its memory. She held it in her palm. If you could truly do what you say, would this be payment enough? The little man's eyes brightened at once. Aye, he said approvingly. Gold for gold, a sensible beginning. He reached out his hand. Elsa hesitated only a moment longer. Then she placed the necklace in his palm. The little man turned it once in the candlelight, admiring the small gleam of it, before slipping it neatly into his coat. Very well, he said cheerfully. Let us begin. He seated himself at the spinning wheel, as though he had known it all his life. His small hands moved with surprising certainty. He gathered a bundle of straw, twisted it lightly between his fingers, and set the wheel into motion. The wheel began to hum. At first Elsa saw only the straw passing through his hands. Then she saw the thread. It gleamed faintly into the candlelight. Not pale like straw. Gold. Real gold. Elsa took a step closer. The thread wound on the spindle in smooth, shining lines, bright as sunlight trapped in metal. The little man worked quickly, the wheel turning faster now, its quiet hum filling the chambers. Straw after straw passing through his fingers. Each one became gold. The fire sank lower in the hearth. The candles burned shorter. Outside the window, the night deepened and slowly began to fade again toward morning. Still, the little man spun. At last, the final bundle of straw was gone. The room was quiet once more. Before them stood not heaps of dry straw, but neat, shining coils of golden thread stacked carefully beside the wheel. The little man rose lightly from the stool and brushed a few loose strands from his coat. There, he said with satisfaction. Elsa stared at the gold in disbelief. You truly did it, she whispered. The little man gave a small bow. A bargain properly made, he said, is a powerful thing. He moved toward the shadowed corner where he had first appeared. Before stepping fully into the darkness, he looked back at her. I suspect, he said thoughtfully, that the king will be pleased. His smile widened just a little. And kings who are pleased often ask for more. The candle's flames flickered. The shadows shifted. And then he was gone. Morning arrived quietly. A pale winter light crept through the narrow window, high in the stone wall. Soft and colorless at first, then slowly brightening the chamber where Elsa had passed the long night. The fire had burned down to a bed of gray ash. The candles had nearly melted to their holders. But the gold remained. It lay coiled neatly beside the spinning wheel, shining even in the faint daylight. Elsa had not slept. She sat on the low stool with her hands folded in her lap, watching the gold as though it might vanish if she looked away too long. She had turned over the events of the night again and again in her mind. The little man, the spinning wheel humming in the darkness, the straw becoming gold beneath his hands. Each time she tried to explain it to herself, reason slipped away like mist. At last she heard footsteps in the corridor. A key turned. The heavy door opened. The king stepped inside. For a moment, he said nothing. His gaze traveled across the room, the empty straw heaps, the spinning wheel, the coils of golden thread lying in quiet abundance on the floor. A smile spread across his face, slow and unmistakable. Well, he said at last. Elsa rose from the stool but did not speak. The king bent to lift one of the shining skeins. He weighed it in his hand, letting the light from the window strike the gold. Remarkable, he murmured. He looked at Elsa again, and the brightness in his eyes had grown sharper than before. I see your father spoke more wisely than you believed. Elsa did not answer. Something in the king's manner made her uneasy. The satisfaction in his voice was not the relief she had hoped for. It was something hungrier. He walked slowly around the room, studying the gold as though measuring it in his thoughts. Then he stopped. "You must come with me," he said. Elsa felt the quiet hope she had carried through the long night begin to dissolve. "Your Majesty," she said cautiously, "the gold is there, as you asked." "Yes," the king replied pleasantly, "and it is most impressive." He gestured toward the door. "But one chamber is not enough to satisfy a curious mind." They led her once more through the high corridors of the castle. The morning light now filled the windows, turning the frost along the glass into pale silver patterns. Servants had begun their work. Fires burned brighter in the hearths. Yet none of the life of the castle touched Elsa. She felt as though she walked within a narrow path laid out for her, long before she arrived. At the top of another stair, they came to a second door. When it opened, Elsa's breath caught. This chamber was even larger than the first. Straw filled it from wall to wall. Great pale drifts piled nearly to the height of a tall man's shoulder. Several spinning wheels stood waiting in the middle of the room, their polished wood gleaming faintly in the daylight. The sight of it made Elsa's stomach tighten. The king watched her carefully. "All this straw," he said thoughtfully, "must be spun into gold before morning." Elsa turned to him. "That cannot be done." The king's expression remained mild. "You accomplished it once already." "I did not," she said. The words came before she could soften them. For a moment, the room was silent. The king studied her face with a curious expression. "You are modest," he said at last. Then he stepped aside. "You may begin your work when you wish." The guards guided her into the chamber. Once again, the door closed. Once again, the key turned. Elsa stood among the towering heaps of straw and felt the same heavy stillness settle over the room. The spinning wheels waited. The straw rustled faintly when she moved. She walked slowly to the nearest stool and sat down. For a long time, she simply looked at the straw. The gold from the first chamber had not saved her. It had only shown the king that more gold might be made. And the little man? She did not know whether he would return. The memory of his voice lingered in the room as clearly as if he had spoken only moments before. A bargain properly made is a powerful thing. Elsa folded her hands together. The hours passed slowly. The light faded from the window. Evening gathered along the stone walls. One by one, the candles burned lower. At last, the chamber grew quiet enough that she could hear only the small sounds of the night brushing against the castle towers. Elsa lowered her head. "If you were there," she said softly into the empty room, "I have nothing left to give." The fire in the hearth gave a faint settling sound. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then a familiar voice answered from the shadows. "Nothing." Elsa lifted her head quickly. The little man stood beside the far wall, just as he had the night before, his small figure half hidden in the flickering light. He looked around the room with mild approval. "My," he said thoughtfully, "that is quite a great deal of straw." Elsa rose slowly from the stool. For a moment, she felt a strange relief simply seeing him again, though she did not fully understand why. The room had felt larger and far more silent when she waited alone. Now, the stillness seemed to settle around the two of them, like a familiar thing. "You have come back," she said quietly. The little man gave a small shrug. "You sounded rather certain that you needed help." He stepped lightly through the straw, his pointed shoes making almost no sound. When he reached the spinning wheel, he ran his fingers along the smooth wooden rim as if greeting an old friend. "The king was pleased with gold last night, I imagine." Elsa nodded. "He was." "And so," the little man said, glancing around the chambers again, "he would like more." "Yes." The word came out softer than she intended. The little man tilted his head and studied her. "You seem less surprised tonight." "I understand the king now." Elsa replied. "Aye," he said. "That is useful thing to understand." He picked up a bundle of straw and let it fall again between his fingers. "Kings who discover gold rarely stop with one room." Elsa's hands tightened slightly. "I thought perhaps," she said slowly, "that he would see the gold and be satisfied." The little man gave a quiet, knowing laugh. "Satisfaction is a rare visitor in royal houses." He turned toward her again. "And so, we return to our question." His bright eyes gleamed faintly in the candlelight. "What would he give me this time?" Elsa hesitated. The necklace was gone. It had been a painful thing to part with, but at least it had only been an object, something small, something that belonged to the past. Now she searched herself for anything else of value. At last, she slipped a ring from her finger. It was a simple band of gold, worn smooth from years of use. Her father had given it to her when she was first beginning to help him manage the mill accounts. His quiet way of acknowledging that she had become more than a child in his household. She held it in her palm for a moment before speaking. "This is all I have left with me," she said. The little man stepped closer. "May I see?" Elsa placed the ring in his outreached hand. He examined it carefully, turning it so the candlelight glinted along the worn edges. His smile returned. "Aye," he said at last. "This will do nicely." He slipped the ring into the pocket of his coat. "A fair bargain." Then, with the easy confidence of someone repeating a familiar task, he seated himself at the spinning wheel. "Now," he said, gathering the first bundle of straw, "let us see what can be done." The wheel began to turn. Its low hum filled the chamber at once. Elsa watched closely this time. She could not help herself. The mystery of the transformation held her attention as strongly as the night before. The little man's hands moved quickly and skillfully. He twisted the dry straw between his fingers, guiding it toward the wheel. The fibers caught the motion and drew it out into a thread, but not the dull, brittle thread she would have expected. Instead, the strand gleamed, gold, bright, living gold that caught the candlelight and shone like captured sunlight. Again and again he worked. Straw entered his hands, gold emerged. The wheel spun faster now, its steady rhythm filling the chamber like a quiet ticking of time itself. The straw heaps slowly sank lower as the shining coils of thread gathered beside the wheel. Elsa felt both wonder and unease as she watched. The little man seemed tireless. His movements were light and precise, almost graceful. Yet there was something unsettling in the ease in which he accomplished what should have been impossible. Outside the narrow window, the night deepened. The fire burned low again. One by one, the straw piles disappeared. At last, the final bundle was gone. The chamber stood quiet once more. Where straw had once filled the room, neat stacks of golden thread now gleamed in the candlelight. The little man rose from the stool and dusted his hands together lightly. "There," he said with satisfaction. Elsa looked around the chamber in disbelief. The king would find this room just as he had found the first, filled with gold. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe. The little man watched her thoughtfully. "I imagine," he said, "that the king will be even more pleased tomorrow." Elsa's relief faded almost at once. "Yes," she said softly. "And kings who are pleased," the little man continued, "often become curious." Elsa looked at him. "You think he will ask again?" The little man's smile was small and knowing. "I think," he said, "that this castle holds many empty rooms." He stepped backward into the deeper shadows near the wall. Before he vanished completely, he spoke once more. "If that happens," he said quietly, "we may yet have more business together." The candle flames flickered. The shadows shifted. And once again, the little man was gone. Morning came again, pale and cold beyond the narrow window. Elsa had not moved far from the spinning mill when the key turned in the door. The king entered with the same quiet confidence as before, though this time his steps slowed, almost at once. The chamber gleamed. Where heaps of straw had stood the night before, coils of golden thread now rested neat and shining stacks along the walls. The king stared. For a moment he said nothing at all. Then a low sound escaped him, something between a laugh and a breath of astonishment. "Extraordinary," he murmured. He lifted one of the skeins and held it toward the window, watching how the weak winter sunlight caught the metal thread. The gold shone with steady brightness, unmistakable and pure. When he turned back to Elsa, the curiosity in his face had deepened into something more intense. "You have done it again." Elsa lowered her gaze. The king paced slowly through the room, examining the gold, as though measuring its worth in his thoughts. At last, he stopped. "You must come with me," he said. Elsa felt her heart sink. "Your Majesty," she began carefully, "the task you set has been completed." "Yes," the king replied. "And very well." He gestured toward the door. "But there is one more matter I would see settled." They climbed higher this time, farther into the quiet upper reaches of the castle, where fewer torches burned and the air felt colder. At the end of a narrow corridor stood another iron-banded door. When it opened, Elsa knew at once what she would find. The chamber was the largest yet. Straw filled it in towering heaps that brushed the lower beams of the ceiling. The pale stalks lay everywhere, along the walls, across the floor, spilling toward the center stage where a single spinning wheel waited beside a low wooden stool. The king spread his hands slightly. "All this," he said calmly, "must be spun into gold before morning." Elsa did not bother to protest this time. She simply stood looking at the straw, feeling the same heavy stillness settled over her as before. "If you succeed," the king added thoughtfully, "I may find it worthwhile to reward such remarkable talent." Elsa didn't know what sort of reward he meant. The guard stepped forward. The door closed. The key turned. For a long while, Elsa remained standing in the middle of the room. The piles of straw seemed endless. The spinning wheel waited silently beside the stool. Outside the window, the sky slowly darkened toward evening. At last, she sat down. Her hands rested loosely in her lap as she stared at the straw. The gold from the previous nights had done nothing to free her. Each success had only drawn the king deeper into his own curiosity. And the little man, he had come twice, but bargains, she suspected, rarely repeated themselves without growing heavier. The fire settled in the hearth with a faint sigh. The first candle flickered. Night gathered slowly around the stone walls, and Elsa closed her eyes. "If you were there," she said quietly into the dim chamber, "I believe you know why I call for you." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the familiar voice answered from the shadows. "Oh, yes," the little man said softly. "I believe I do." Elsa opened her eyes. He stood near the window this time, where the last traces of twilight outlined his small figure against the stone. His coat of dark green cloth looked almost black in the fading light. He studied the towering heaps of straw with open interest. "Well," he said after a moment, "the king has grown ambitious." Elsa rose slowly. "There's more straw than before." "Yes," the little man agreed. "Quite a deal more." He walked toward the spinning wheel, brushing his fingers thoughtfully along the wooden rim. "And," he added lightly, "I suspect you have little left to offer in exchange." Elsa said nothing. The necklace was gone. The ring was gone. There was nothing else. The little man turned to face her. His bright eyes regarded her calmly, almost gently. "But that is not entirely true," he said. Elsa felt the quiet dread return. "What do you mean?" The little man folded his hands behind his back and began to walk slowly around the spinning wheel. "Consider your future," he said. "You are young. Your life may take many paths yet." Elsa did not like where his thoughts were leading. "You speak as though you already know the path." "Oh, no," he replied softly. "But I understand how kings think." He gestured toward the heaps of gold thread from the previous chambers, far below in the castle. "A king who sees such wealth appear from nothing will not easily forget the person who made it possible." Elsa's voice grew tight. "And what has that to do with me?" The little man stopped walking. "If the king remains pleased," he said slowly, "he may reward you in ways neither of you expect." Elsa felt a chill move throughout her. "You speak in riddles." The little man shook his head. "Only in possibilities." He met her gaze steadily. "Tell me, Elsa, if one day you were to become queen, what then?" She stared at him. "That is impossible." "Perhaps," he said lightly. "But if such a thing happened, you might one day have a child." The words hung heavily in the quiet chamber. Elsa's breath caught. "And if that child were promised to me," he finished calmly, "then tonight's straw could become gold." The silence that followed seemed to press against the walls. "That's a terrible bargain," Elsa whispered. The little man did not appear offended. "'Tis a bargain," he said simply. Elsa turned away, her thoughts racing. If she refused, the straw would remain straw. The king would know that she had deceived him. And kings, she suspected, did not show mercy to those who embarrassed them. But if she agreed, the promise lay somewhere in the distant future, beyond events that might never happen. Perhaps the king would lose interest. Perhaps she would never see the strange creature again. The room seemed to hold its breath. At last, Elsa spoke. "If I make such a promise," she said slowly, "you will spin all the straw tonight?" "Yes." "The king will be satisfied?" "Aye, for now." She closed her eyes for a moment. Fear had guided her the first night. It guided her still. At last she turned back to him. "If I should one day become queen," she said quietly, "and if I should have a child, then that child will be yours." The little man's smile returned. "A promise," he said. "Yes." He bowed slightly. "Then a bargain is made." He seated himself at the spinning wheel. The work began again. The wheel hummed through the long hours of night as straw passed through his quick hands and became shining gold thread. The towering heaps slowly disappeared, replaced by bright coils of metal that gleamed in the candlelight. At last the final bundle was gone. The chamber glittered with gold. The little man rose lightly from the stool. "A pleasure doing business," he said. Elsa watched him carefully. "What are you?" she asked quietly. He paused in the shadows. For a moment his bright eyes softened with something like distant amusement. "Someone," he said, "who understands promises." The candle flames flickered. The shadows deepened. And once again, he was gone. The king was more than pleased when he entered the third chamber that morning and saw the gold. More gold than any treasurer in the kingdom could have spun in a season. His astonishment gave quickly to satisfaction. For several long moments he walked among the shining coils, lifting them, weighing them, letting them fall again in bright loops that chimed softly against one another. At last, he turned to Elsa. "You have proven something remarkable," he said. Elsa didn't answer. She simply lowered her gaze and waited. The king studied her thoughtfully. Then he smiled. "There are many noble ladies in this kingdom," he said, "but few who can fill a castle with gold before sunrise." He paused as though considering the matter carefully. "And such talent should not remain in a mill house." Before the day was finished, the king announced that he would marry her. The court murmured with surprise. Some whispered that fortune had favored the miller's daughter beyond all reason. Others watched the piles of gold being carried away and nodded quietly to themselves. Elsa heard none of it clearly. She stood through the ceremony as though moving through a dream. The stone walls of the chapel rose high around her. Candlelight glowed along the long rows of benches. The king's voice sounded steady as he spoke the vows. When it was finished, she was no longer the miller's daughter. She was queen. The seasons passed. At first, Elsa believed the strange bargain she had made might fade like a troubling dream. Life within the castle filled her days with new duties and unfamiliar rhythms. There were councils to attend beside the king, petitions brought before the throne, guests welcomed at long evening tables where musicians played softly beneath the carved rafters. Her father came once to visit. He walked the great halls of the castle in awkward amazement, touching the stone walls as if to assure himself they were real. He spoke proudly of his daughter, the queen, though his eyes avoided hers whenever the memory of the old boast passed between them. Elsa did not remind him. Some regrets were already heavy enough. Time moved forward quietly. Winter softened into spring. The fields below the castle turned green again. Merchants arrived with wagons full of cloth, spices, and carved treasures from distant cities. The kingdom prospered under the king's careful rule. And still, the strange little man did not return. Little by little, Elsa allowed herself to hope that he never would. Years passed. Then one autumn morning, as the first leaves were turning gold along the forest edge, a child was born in the castle. The bells rang throughout the town below the hill. Servants hurried through the halls carrying news to every corner of the palace. Fires were lit in the kitchens, musicians gathered again in the great hall. The king was overjoyed. He walked beside the cradle again and again, marveling at the small, sleeping face of his daughter. Elsa watched him with quiet tenderness. For a few peaceful days she believed that happiness had finally settled over the castle like gentle sunlight. But promises, once spoken, rarely forget themselves. One evening, not long after the celebrations had ended, Elsa sat alone in her chamber beside the child's cradle. A small fire burned softly in the hearth. The window was open just enough to let in the cool night air. The baby slept peacefully. Elsa rested her hand lightly on the cradle's edge and listened to the slow rhythm of her breathing. It had been so long. Perhaps the little man had forgotten. Perhaps whatever strange world he came from had drawn him elsewhere. Perhaps a soft voice spoke behind her. "Good evening, Your Majesty." Elsa felt the air leave her lungs. Slowly, she turned. The little man stood near the far wall, just beyond the reach of the firelight. He looked exactly the same small figure, the same green coat, the same bright eyes that seemed far too old for such a small face. He gave a polite bow. "I trust you remember our bargain." The words fell gently in the quiet room. Elsa rose slowly. For a moment she couldn't speak. At last she managed a whisper. "You came." The little man tilted his head. "Of course," he said softly. "Promises are patient things." His gaze drifted toward the cradle. "And I believe," he added, "that the time has come for you to keep yours." Elsa felt the room grow colder. The little man stood quietly near the wall, as though he had merely come to continue a conversation left unfinished for a short while, rather than for years. Her hand moved instinctively to the cradle. "No," she said softly. The little man's expression did not change. "You gave your word." Elsa shook her head, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. "I spoke in fear. I didn't understand what I was promising." The little man regarded her calmly. "Fear often sharpens the truth of a promise," he said. Elsa stepped between him and the cradle. "You cannot take her." The little man sighed faintly, as though the situation had grown inconvenient. "My dear queen," he said, "I have already done the work I promised. 3 nights of it. The gold still lies in the king's vaults." His bright eyes lifted to meet hers. and a bargain properly cannot simply be forgotten. Elsa felt despair rising within her. She thought of the silent spinning wheel in the tower, of the gold thread piling higher and higher beneath the candlelight, of the terrible promise she had spoken to save her own life. "Please," she whispered. The little man studied her for a long moment. At last he spoke again. "You weep more sweetly than most queens," he said thoughtfully. Elsa did not care how she appeared. She knelt beside the cradle, her hand resting gently against the child's blanket. "I will give you gold," she said quickly, "more gold than you carried away from those rooms. The king would gladly fill 10 chests for you." The little man shook his head. "Gold is plentiful in his castle now." "Jewels, then? Land? Anything?" "None of those things interest me." Elsa looked at him helplessly. "What do you want?" The little man seemed to consider her question carefully. At last, he gave a small smile. "Very well," he said. "Because you asked so earnestly, I will offer you one final chance." Hope flickered faintly in Elsa's chest. "What chance?" The little man walked slowly around the room, his footsteps soundless on the stone floor. "In the old stories," he said, "names are powerful things." Elsa listened carefully. "To know a person's true name," he continued, "is to understand something of their nature." He stopped beside the cradle and looked down at the sleeping child. "And sometimes," he added quietly, "to hold power over them." Elsa held her breath. The little man turned back to her. "I will give you 3 days," he said. "If before the 3rd night ends you can discover my true name and speak it to me aloud, then you may keep your daughter." Elsa stared at him. "And if I cannot?" The little man smiled return. "10 the bargain stands." He stepped back into the deeper shadows near the door. 3 days, he repeated. Then he was gone. The chamber fell silent again. Elsa remained kneeling beside the cradle long after the candle had burned low. At dawn, she summoned the king. He listened to her story in grave silence. When she finished, he paced the length of the chamber with troubled steps. "At least he has given us a chance," the king said at last. Elsa was not comforted. "What if we can't find his name?" The king stopped. "Then we must search harder." That very morning, riders left the castle gates in every direction. They traveled across the kingdom and beyond, stopping in villages, market towns, and remote farms where the oldest people still remembered curious names passed down through generations. Each night they returned to the castle with long lists. Elsa sat beside the cradle and tried them one by one. "Is your name Conrad?" she asked the first night. The little man appeared from the shadows and shook his head. "No." "Perhaps Mattias?" Again he smiled. "No." "Sebastian? Leopold? Friedrich?" Each name was wrong. By the end of the first night, Elsa's voice had grown faint with exhaustion. The little man simply bowed politely and disappeared again. The second day, the riders traveled even farther. They searched the deep valleys near the mountains and the far villages beyond the forest. They spoke with shepherds, woodcutters, and wandering traders who had crossed many strange lands. That evening, Elsa tried again. "Is your name Balthasar?" "No." "Albrecht?" "No." "Perhaps Rupert?" The little man chuckled softly. "You grow closer to interesting guesses," he said, "but still not close enough." He vanished before dawn. The third day arrived. The castle had grown tense with quiet worry. Even the servants spoke in hushed voices as they carried their work through the halls. Elsa remained beside the cradle, waiting for the riders to return. The sun was already sinking when the final messenger galloped through the castle gates. His horse was lathered with foam from the long ride. The man himself could scarcely catch his breath. But when he reached the great hall, he bowed quickly and said, "Your Majesty, I believe I've heard the name you seek." The great hall had grown quiet by the time the messenger finished speaking. Elsa stood beside the long table where the king and his council had gathered. The man who had ridden so hard from the forest still leaned forward, one hand braced against the wood as he struggled to steady his breathing. "Tell us," the king said. The messenger nodded quickly. "I had ridden far beyond the villages, near the river," he began. "The road there runs close to the old forest. I had not heard any unusual names all day, and evening was already falling." He paused before continuing. "As I passed the edge of the woods, I noticed a narrow path I had never seen before. It wound between the trees and it disappeared in the shadows. I might have ridden past it, but I saw a glow deeper within the forest." "A fire?" Elsa said quietly. "Yes, your majesty," the messenger replied. "A small one." He lifted his head. "I followed the light." The hall seemed to grow stiller as he spoke. "The path led to a clearing hidden deep among the trees, and there, beside the fire, I saw a strange little figure dancing." Elsa felt her breath catch. The messenger continued. "He leapt and spun around in the flames, clapping his hands and laughing to himself as he danced, and he sang." "What did he sing?" the king asked. The messenger glanced toward Elsa. These were his words. "Tonight I brew, tomorrow I bake. Soon the queen's own child I'll take. No one knows the truth I spin. My name is Rumpelstiltskin." Silence settled across the hall. Elsa felt the name echo quietly in her thoughts. Rumpelstiltskin. The strange sound of it felt unfamiliar and inevitable at once, as though the name had always existed somewhere beyond the edge of memory, waiting to be discovered. The king straightened slowly. "Are you certain this is what you heard?" "Yes, your majesty," the messenger said firmly. Elsa lowered her eyes. At last, she thought. A path had appeared where there had been none. That evening, she returned to her chamber and sat beside the cradle as the last light of day faded beyond the castle windows. Her daughter slept peacefully beneath the soft wool blankets, unaware of the promise that had been made before she was ever born. Elsa brushed a gentle hand across the child's hair. "It will be over soon," she whispered. Night fell quietly over the castle. The fire in the hearth burned low. The candles flickered softly against the stone walls. And just as he had on the nights before, the little man appeared in the shadows. "Good evening, your majesty," he said politely. Elsa rose slowly. "Good evening." The little man looked pleased. "You've had your 3 days," he said. "I have." "Then tell me," he continued with quiet confidence, "what is my name?" Elsa pretended to consider the question carefully. "Is your name Conrad?" The little man smiled. "Nah." "Perhaps Matthias?" "Nah." Elsa tilted her head slightly. "Then maybe Leopold?" The little man chuckled softly. "You go closer to the sound of it," he said, "but not close enough." Elsa let a small silence pass. Then she spoke again. "Could it be Rumpelstiltskin?" For a moment, he simply stared at her, as though the name itself had taken the strength from him. "You have learned it," he said quietly. Elsa said nothing. In the old stories, knowing a true name was no small thing. A name carried the shape of someone's nature. When it was spoken aloud, certain bargains could no longer hold. Rumpelstiltskin looked once toward the cradle, where the child slept peacefully beside the fire. Then he gave a small, almost thoughtful nod. "A clever queen," he said softly. "The bargain is ended." The candle flames flickered. The shadows shifted along the stone walls. And the strange little man, who knew the secrets of straw and gold, slipped quietly back into the darkness from which he'd come. Elsa remained standing for a moment, listening to the stillness. Then she crossed the room and lifted her daughter gently from the cradle. Outside the window, the night lay calm across the kingdom, and the wind moved softly through the distant forest. The old promise had been spoken, and the old promise had been broken. At last the castle could rest, and now the castle grows quiet once more. The fires burn low in the hearths, and the long halls of the stone settle in the gentle stillness of night. Outside the windows, the wind moves softly through the trees beyond the fields, carrying the quiet sounds of the sleeping kingdom. The spinning wheels are silent now. The straw has long since become gold, and the strange bargain that once hung over the castle has finally unraveled, thread by thread, as old promises sometimes do. Somewhere beyond the forest, in places where the old stories still wander, the little man who knew the secrets of straw and gold has disappeared once again into the deeper shadows of the world. And here, in the quiet chamber high in the castle tower, a mother holds her child close, knowing that the long and troubled nights have finally come to their end. The candles burn low. The wind softens, and the whole kingdom drifts gently toward rest. So now, let the story grow quiet and fade into the night. Sleep now. You are safe, and you are loved. You have been listening to Nicki Cozy Stories, written by Nicole T. Woodard. May your dreams be gentle, and your sleep be deep.